Hi there, I'm Paul. Thanks very much for checking out this Power Apps video. So in this video, I want to talk about the refresh command, a command that seems very simple, but it has some undocumented strange effects that you should be aware of because they could very well be the reason for your Power Apps being slow. So there are behaviours associated with refresh that definitely cause performance problems within Power Apps. So in this session, I'm going to explain the refresh command, what it does, when you should use it, the strange byproducts of the refresh command, and then I'm going to show you an alternate to refresh that you can use in your own apps to get better control over them and to tweak the performance and get better performance out of your apps. So let's jump straight in. What I've got here is a little screen that I've just set up. I've set it up on the end of an existing app just because it's going to be helpful that we've got lots of other formulas and things in the app. It's going to help to demonstrate what's going on a little bit better. So this particular app is all about projects, and what I've done on this screen is I've just set it up so that if I enter a project ID into this text box here, so this text box is called TXT ID. If I enter a project number into this text box here, then this label will show you the name of the project. So that label is just doing a lookup, saying lookup in our project table where the ID matches the value of what I typed into the text box and return the name. So straightforward. I'm going to take that out again for a second. Now, in order to show you what Power Apps is doing under the surface, I'm going to use the Monitor tool. Monitor is under the Advanced Tools. So if you come to the navigator here, Advanced Tools, and do Open Monitor, a new tab is going to open up in my browser. And this tab is going to show me the interactions that I am having with my app, and also the interactions that the app is having with its data source. So let's show you that in effect. Let's just put this into play mode, and again I'm going to select the project ID 1300, which has caused the app to go and get the data. Let's just see what's happened here exactly. So here we are. It tells me that I've done a user action. I did a select on the TXT control. Okay, I then typed some things in, and having changed the value of the TXT control, that has triggered this lookup to fire. So what we have is our label lookup with its lookup column in it, with its lookup formula in it, sorry. So there we are. So that's caused that to fire, and we can see in our properties a little bit more information. So we can see the formula that fired. Okay, don't worry about these other commented out parts. I'm going to talk about those later. This is the formula we're talking about right now. So it's caused that formula to fire. We can see the request that was generated. So it said, do me a filter where the ID is equal to 1300 and just give me the top one row. So that sort of OData format data request. And we can even see the data that has come back in the response. Now, interestingly, it's actually brought back all of the fields. It hasn't just brought back the name fields that we requested. And that's something just worth noting. That's why Monitor can be really useful, because sometimes Power Apps is not doing quite what you expect or quite what you asked. So here we asked it to just give us the name. The way that it's decided to go and do that is to actually get all of the fields. Then once they've all come back from the data source, throw away everything except the name and just display the name. So well worth using Monitor to see what's going on. As an aside, you might be able to return just the name if you turn on the explicit column selection in advanced settings, but just a warning, I have had problems with that setting in the past. It has broken production apps, so apps that were working absolutely fine one day, nobody touches the code, you come back the next day and you find they're broken. So I've had that on a few occasions with that particular setting, but it is still an experimental setting, I think, so that's kind of to be expected, but do just be wary of putting that into any production system. Okay, so we've said that, and we can see, yeah, what's going on. We type in our ID, we get the name back. So when would we want to do a refresh? Well, we might want to do a refresh if we think that this value has changed in the underlying data source. So let's go to our underlying data source. In this case, it is SQL. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run an update, which is going to change the value. So it's just going to put test SQL change on the end of the project name. And that hasn't changed in my Power App, of course. Power Apps doesn't sit there and keep checking for changes. It doesn't poll for changes. There's no communication which is triggered from the data source down to the Power App. Everything is from the Power App. The Power App is going and pulling the data from the data source. So because we haven't done a pull of the data hasn't changed. So a way that we can do the pull of the data is with the refresh command. So here's the refresh command, refresh, and we just tell it what data source we want to refresh, what we think might have changed. So I'm just going to clear the data out of the monitor for a moment, and I am going to run this refresh. So this should change. Boom, and there we are. It has changed, and we're going to go and look in monitor. Monitor can take a little while sometimes to get its act together, but here it goes. And we can see that that has triggered a whole bunch of recalculations of formulas. So it has re-triggered our label lookup. We can see that. But it's also done a few others as well. So here's another one. So on another screen, there is a control which is just called Form 2. Always name your controls properly. I'll go back and name that one in a moment. So if we go to that, we will see that, yep, there was a formula there that was referencing the projects table as well. So Power Apps is just going through and saying, right, everything that references these formulas, go ahead, sorry, every formula that references this data source, go ahead and run that formula again. So throughout the whole app, all of the screens, all of the controls, anything that references that data source is going to be recalculated. It's going to pull its data in again. And you know that can be good. It would be nice to have a bit of control over things, to say, actually, no, I just want to do the ones on this screen, perhaps. And we're going to show you that with the alternate method. But the other thing that this refresh command has done that we definitely don't want is it's gone and pulled in a whole load of unnecessary data. So here, the very first thing it does when you issue the refresh is it just goes and pulls all of the data from the data source up to the delegation limit or the delegable limit. And there's no reason for it to do that. That data is not of any value. As far as I'm aware, that's not actually used anywhere. So that's definitely a bad thing. So if we just go to the response for a moment, what we will see is we have got lots and lots and lots of data coming in that is completely unnecessary. So that's all of the columns for the project table, and my delegation limit on this app is set to 500. So that's 500 rows of wasted information. So that's putting a load on your data source because it's got to go and get that information, and it's putting a load on your network because it's got to go across the network, and it is slowing down your Power App because it's just more commands that Power App is having to run and more data that it's got to process with absolutely no benefit. So that's the big downside to the refresh command. We definitely don't want this happening. Now, hopefully at some point in the future, Microsoft will fix that. But in the meantime, I will show you an alternative. So just for reference, it is currently January 2021 when I'm making this video. So you might just want to check and see, if you're watching this in a few months' time, whether this has been tidied up, whether this behavior has been fixed or not. Okay, now just before I show you the alternative method, what I also want to do is show you that sometimes you don't need to do a recalculation, either by refresh or any other method, because Power Apps will actually do it for you in certain circumstances. So if you are making a change from inside Power Apps, whether that be a patch or a remove or a submit form, then Power Apps should be aware of that change, aware of what data source has been affected, and it should do all the recalculations for you automatically without you having to issue a refresh, and without that overhead, that bug, if it is a bug, that strange behavior of the refresh command pulling in all that data that you don't need. So I'm just going to clear my monitor session, and I'm going to make a change to the project title. So this text box here is just defaulting to whatever is the current name for the project, and the patch command is just going ahead and patching back to the project table, back to the selected record. That's the record whose ID that we've typed in, 1300 in this case, and it's going to update the name to whatever you have set in this txt new name text box. So there we are. So that's what's happening there. So if I change this, and I am going to say this time test from within the app. So when I hit patch here, okay, this one has automatically been updated. I didn't have to do anything extra manual. So if I have a look at monitor, once I've hit my button, my patch demo button, then it has gone ahead and it has made the changes to the data. And then it has said, oh yeah, there are all of these, there's form 2.2 again, and look up, all of these controls make reference to that data source, so therefore I need to recalculate their data as well. And notice that this doesn't have that big overhead of the refresh. It's not pulling in all that data up to the delegable limit. Okay, so that's cool. So just remember that you only really want to recalculate when something has changed outside of your Power App or your instance of the Power App. If you've got two people using the Power App on two different machines, then machine A is not going to know that machine B has made a change. Okay, it's only when you're making it from directly within this same Power App that it knows to go and refresh those data sources. Now, you have to be a little bit wary, because there are a few instances where where things may not update. So here's an example of one. What I've got here is I've got a formula, which I'm just going to uncomment so that we can see that running. And what this formula is doing is it is getting the project name again, but it's getting it from a view in SQL Server. So a view in SQL Server is sort of a pre-rendered filter. It is something where you can combine tables together, and you can apply filters, and you can do calculated columns and all sorts of really clever things. SQL is great. And in this case, this view is giving me the project information, but also some related information as well. It's pulling in some information from other tables. But Power Apps does not know that this view and the project table are related. It doesn't know that that one impacts the other. So if I make a change here from within the app again, so let's just say test again and patch that, okay, this one hasn't changed, okay, because it's a different data source. Power Apps has no awareness that this view has anything to do with this table. Okay, so to fix that, we can go ahead, and that's just another of those refresh commands. But of course, we're getting this big overhead with the big chunk of data that we're having to pull in. Okay, so just bear in mind, sometimes you don't need to recalculate anything. Okay, if you do need to recalculate things and you use refresh, then you're going to be paying a big price, a big overhead, pulling in a lot of data that you don't need, particularly if you've got a very wide table with lots of fields and a lot of rows, and that's going to be even worse if you have cranked up your delegation limit. So what is this alternative that I kept mentioning? Well, we'll look at the alternative in the context of this box here, this formula, which is going and looking up the information from the view. So if I want a different way of getting that to recalculate without using the refresh command, how can I do it? Okay, well, you'll get an idea if I show you the following. I'm going to do another update. So we'll say test again, and I'm going to hit the patch button on here. And obviously this one has not changed. We know that isn't going to change because Power Apps isn't aware that the view this is based on is linked to the table that we've just updated. But watch what happens here. If I change my ID, change it to 1301, I could change it to anything. And then I'm going to change it back again to 1300. And now it has updated. Okay, so changing that ID, changing that parameter has caused this to go ahead and recalculate. So anytime there it is, txt ID text, anytime parameters change, that causes the formulas to be recalculated to go and fetch their data again. So we can use that to our advantage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a context variable, and I'm just going to switch its value between false and true. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this formula, and to save you the bother of my bad typing, I've already got it ready for me here. So all I'm doing is I'm modifying the formula so that there is another parameter. So I've added the parameter and con refresh. So remember, con refresh just changes between false and true. So now I can go ahead and make a changes, and I can patch that. And now when I want to get this to refresh, I don't have to, to recalculate, I don't have to do a refresh. I don't have to change that parameter. I can just use this. Boom, and it's changed. Awesome. So that is how we can get things to recalculate without having to do a refresh. I'm doing it with a context variable here. You could equally do it with a global variable. So if I want to have one button, let's say, so the recalculation could be triggered by many things, but let's say you want to trigger it on a button, and I want it to refresh everywhere that I am referencing that data source, then I could just make that, instead of being a context variable, I could make that a global variable. I could use the set command, and I could put that in there as a parameter, and then that would do it throughout the whole app. I've got to go through and I've got to find everywhere where I reference that data source and add that parameter in, but all I'm doing is just putting and the parameter at the end. So that's cool. So you can get some real control there because you can set it up so that you can refresh just things on a particular screen, or you can refresh just an individual formula, or you can refresh it throughout your whole app. Now, there is just one little tweak that we're going to need to make to this, and this is due to another undocumented behavior of Power Apps. So let me show you this. I'm going to clear the data for a moment, and I'm going to, let's hit update context. I'm going to put an X on the end of that and patch it, and then I'm going to hit update context again, and notice that hasn't changed. Okay, that has not updated. So what's happening? What's going on with that? Let me clear my data for a moment, and let's do it again. Update context and update context. And there, finally, it has done what I want. So what's happening with that? Let me show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get my screens side by side to demonstrate this to you. There we go. I'm going to clear the data away. So another undocumented behavior in Power Apps to be aware of. If I issue a data call, then obviously it goes off and it gets the data as you would expect. But if I try and issue the same data call within 30 seconds, Power Apps will just ignore it. So it can see that I've hit the button, and I'm going to keep doing the update context. So I did the original one at 05 seconds. So once we get to about 35 seconds, then here we are, we're coming up on it. That time, there we are, then it does the request again. So if you issue the same request for data within 30 seconds, so exactly the same parameters within 30 seconds, then Power Apps is just going to ignore it. So frustrating that, because it doesn't tell you that it's doing it. The only reason that you find that out is by looking in Monitor and scratching your head and trying to figure out what's going on. So if we want this to update every single time, if we want the formula to update every single time we hit the button, we need to make a slight change. But fortunately, it's a pretty easy change. What we're going to do is we're going to, instead of switching between false and true, we are going to do an update context, which is just going to keep subtracting 1 from the variable. So if I hit it a few times, you'll see I've put it alongside -2, -3. So every time we hit the button, we're getting another number. And then in here, what I can do is I can put that in as a parameter. I want to compare it with something which is actually in the data source, so it doesn't just get resolved to true by Power Apps and then treated as the same request for that 30-second timer purposes. So what I'm just going to do, I've got an ID column in my project table. My ID is always a positive number, so my ID is always going to be bigger than whatever con refresh is, because my con refresh is now a negative number and it keeps getting a bigger negative number. So now let's do this side-by-side business again and clear that data. Now, every single time I hit this update context button, it is actually going and getting the data again, and we can see that in Monitor. So now every time, there we are, we've got the data back. So we've been able to work around these strange, undocumented features, don't know if you call them features, bugs, whatever, behaviors of Power Apps. So first strangeness was the refresh command bringing back lots of data that you don't need and therefore messing up the performance of your app. And then the other one that we need to know about is that if we try to issue the same data request within 30 seconds, Power Apps will just ignore it. And so we get around that by making sure that we have a parameter which is changing every time we hit the button or we want to do our recalculation. So there it is. That's the alternative to using refresh, which gives you a lot more control, avoids some of those strange behaviors, and hopefully with that you will be able to make your apps much quicker and much more performant. Fantastic. Okay, well, if you do try that, then please let me know how you get on in the comments below. I've used it in a few apps now, and I've been very satisfied with the increase over the performance. I've used the monitor to measure the performance, and I have seen some really significant gains by making sure that I get rid of refresh, particularly, as I say, in anything which is using Dataverse and those great big entities tables that are incredibly wide, because you are pulling in vast amounts of unnecessary data and really clogging things up if you use the refresh command with Dataverse as your data source. Okay, thanks very much, and I hope to have another video for you ready soon.